Welcome to Spooky News from Spooky Ventures. Today is the 12th of July. That means we're past Summerween and the 4th of July. That also means we're into the unofficial spooky season. I know, I always say spooky is a lifestyle, not a season, and that's absolutely true. But there is something magical when we get more into the traditional time of year associated with spooky things. It seems appropriate then that we've launched our new newsroom for this episode. It's an improvement that we're happy with, and I hope you like it too. Now, before we get into the news, I need to get the usual announcements out of the way and into the world. First, remember, this YouTube channel and all things Spooky Ventures are supposed to be interactive, so please interact. You can do that by liking our videos, sharing our videos, and subscribing to our channel. You can also do that by commenting on our posts and sending us messages. Next up, if you want more information about any of the things we talk about in this show, there are two places you can find that information. First, all the source and more information URLs are listed in the details section of this video. They are also included as title cards after we're done talking. So you can stick around to the end and see them all that way. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's get to the news for this time. We'll start off with our remote reporter, D.B. Lovecraft. He's in Rockford, Illinois right now at a store called Maze Books.
That's right. This store is located in the downtown area of this northern Illinois town, and it's a great example of the resurgence of local bookstores. I'm here because our lead story is centered on books, but I'll be doing all my segments from the store. We'll talk more about this store in particular and the whole independent bookstore trend later, but let's get to our first news item and the reason I'm broadcasting from a bookstore. That's because there's a novelization of Terrifier 2 coming in October. It's written by Tim Wagner, who has written a number of other horror movie novelizations. You'll be able to find it on October 11th. I'm not sure if Maze Books will stock it, but they do have a healthy selection of horror books. Now, our next piece of news is also about books, but this time it's comic books. When it comes to horror comic books, EC is the OG, and the company has been revived, back from the dead, so to speak. Now they have unveiled their collection of horror hosts who will be featured in their titles. As a horror host myself, I found that very interesting. Their new characters will be the Gravedigger, the Tormentor, and the Grim Inquisitor. The trio's first appearance will be in Epitaphs from the Abyss #1, which will hit stores on July 24th. With that little nugget, I'll be back later to give you more news and talk some more about Maze Books. But for now, back to you, Gary.
Thanks, DB. From books, let's move on to merchandise. Our first piece of shopping news centers around the movie Halloween 2, which, I've got the shirt. Mezco has announced a new Michael Myers figure tied into that specific film. Wearing the trademark mask and sporting a kitchen knife, it's a 10.5-inch tall articulated figure. It's expected to be delivered between October and December, but you can pre-order it now. An action figure you can get sooner than that is also coming from Mezco. It's a re-release of their 18-inch Talking Beetlejuice figure. The original release came out in 2008 to commemorate the 20th anniversary of the film. They sell for big bucks on eBay now. The new figure will be released in September, the same month the new movie hits theaters. There's no word if it'll say the same things the old one did, but it's possible. We're getting near the time when all the Halloween stores open, and news is coming out about their new offerings for the year. I talked about some upcoming animatronics from Spirit Halloween last time. Well, another one was recently announced. Unlike the ones I talked about last time, this one is purely original, not based on a piece of fiction, and it's called Shirley Stab. She looks like a 1950s housewife on the surface, but her face is carved like a jack-o'-lantern, and she is armed with a knife. I don't know about you, but I can't wait to get inside a store to see all the new merch for this Halloween. In addition to Halloween stores that will be opening up all over the place, A number of attractions will be transitioning to their spooky season versions in a few weeks. Among those is Universal Studios Hollywood. I talked a little bit about some of their upcoming offerings last time, but another new haunted attraction for this year was recently announced, and that one is a Ghostbusters themed house. The focus will be on the recent Ghostbusters Frozen Empire movie, and it should be a lot of fun. From there, let's look at something that's technically an event, but more presented as a piece of creepy news. A cemetery in Thailand recently held a movie night. The guests, however, were not the living. They set up chairs in the graveyard and screened movies. I almost said screamed. That would have been appropriate, wouldn't it? And screened movies for the approximately 3,000 dead people interred there. Their belief is that the spirits of the dead linger, and they wanted to give them some entertainment. With that piece of news, we'll turn it back to our own Beyond Death remote reporter, D.B. Lovecraft, for some television news.
Thanks, Gary. Let's start with Marvel news. There's a new series coming from the superhero movie machine called Agatha All Along. It's a spin-off of WandaVision, and they are promising that it will be scary and have horror elements. The show, focused on the villain from its predecessor, will be hitting Disney Plus starting in September, so they have aligned it for spooky season. In other news, AMC has renewed their Interview with a Vampire series for a third season. According to the information that has been released, the new season will focus on the vampire Lestat starting a band and going out on tour. I'll be back in a little while, but for now, back to you, Gary.
A vampire-led band on a tour? I've written several short stories focused on that concept. I might have to check out the show this coming season to see what they do with it. From one vampire story to another, a new trailer has dropped for Robert Eggers' version of the classic silent film Nosferatu. Eggers is known for such films as The Witch and The Lighthouse, so fans of those movies should be really excited for this one. For me, it's somewhat intriguing, in part because I write a lot of vampire fiction and have a fascination with that particular type of undead, but I also find it interesting because Nosferatu was really an unauthorized adaptation of Dracula. So to see it being remade in this kind of high-profile way seems interesting. I mean, it was a copy of something else, and now it's getting remade on its own. There's something kind of cool about that. Speaking of trailers, another interesting one was recently unleashed on the world. That's the trailer for Afraid. Now, that title has an emphasis on the A and the I because it's a movie about artificial intelligence as a threat to a family. The movie will be hitting theaters on August 30th, but you can watch the trailer now. Next up, let's talk about a couple of horror icons who are going to be honored with stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. It was recently announced that both director John Carpenter and Freddy Krueger actor Robert Englund will be getting stars at the famed location. Carpenter is my favorite director, so I'm really happy to hear about that. We have a sadder piece of news to report. Actor Donald Sutherland, who horror fans probably know best for the 1930s version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, passed away late last month. While that appearance stands out for genre fans, he's also been in versions of Frankenstein and Salem's Lot, along with many, many non-horror roles. Sutherland, who is the father of Kiefer Sutherland, who is endeared to horror fans for The Lost Boys, was 88 years old. In an interesting side note, the elder Sutherland trained the Slayer in the film version of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, while his son played a vampire in Lost Boys. On that note, we'll turn it over to DB again for news on some home video film releases.
Thanks, Gary. Before I get to that news, though, I promised to talk a little more about Maze Books and indie bookstores in general. First, in a story you talked about in Spooky News earlier this year, it's been reported that horror book sales have really been booming in recent years. So the connection between bookstores and horror is an important one. Now, when it comes to independent bookstores, those too are experiencing record growth. It wasn't that many years ago when it appeared that Amazon was going to corner the market on book sales. They had forced out big chains and independent stores alike. However, the reports of the death of the independent bookstore were premature, and over the last few years, more and more indie brick-and-mortar stores have been opening and thriving. Rockford, Illinois' Maze Books is one of them. It was opened in 2022 by David and Kim Pedersen. Last year, they left their first location and moved a couple blocks away to an easier-to-find storefront. The store focuses on both used and new books. It's also a cultural center for the literary scene in Rockford, Illinois. It's great to see them and indie bookstores in general thriving. You can look them up on the web at maze-books.com or stop in if you're in Rockford at 406 East State Street. Now, on to the rest of the news. As you said, I'm going to be talking about some home releases of movies. First, In a Violent Nature, a movie that's been described as a rethinking of the slasher genre, has been released for digital rental and purchase on Amazon. If you didn't see it in the theater, this is your chance to check it out. It might be hard to believe, but the remake of Friday the 13th was released 15 years ago. Now it's getting a 4K UHD release from Arrow Video. The movie will be augmented with a selection of bonus features and will be released on September 17th. The release will include both the original theatrical release and an extended cut, and it can be pre-ordered now. Now back to you, Gary.
Thanks, DB. That brings us to the end of the news items for this time. But those who regularly watch these shows will know we will have some calendar dates for you. Of course, before that, I like to remind you all of a couple things. First, remember to interact with our channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing our videos. You can also interact by commenting or getting in touch directly. Secondly, remember you can find more information about anything we talked about in this video in two places. First, you can find the source and more information URLs in the details section of this video. But it's also at the end. You can see that by watching the title cards after we're done talking. In a moment, DB will be going over some dates from our Spooky Ventures calendar. Remember, you can always find the calendar at the main page at spookyventures.com. Just scroll down to the bottom of the page to find the link. The calendar includes all kinds of dates that should be of interest to fans of all things spooky. Now, back to DB for a rundown of those dates.
Thanks, Gary. We'll start with 3 movies opening today. The first is the Nicolas Cage film Longlegs. The other 2 movies are Project Silence and The Inheritance. Next Tuesday, the 16th, a new book, The Ojanox 1, Scream in the Dark by Damon Manx, will be published. Horror film The Abode opens on Thursday the 18th. On Friday the 19th, Oddity and Abandon both hit theaters. Another horror book, Chisel the Bone by Renee S. DeCamelis, will be published on Tuesday the 23rd. Finally, horror writer Lord Dunsany's birthday is the next day, Wednesday the 24th. That takes us out 2 weeks, but you can always check the calendar for later dates. There are plenty of other things there that should interest viewers.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of Spooky News from Spooky Ventures. On behalf of DB and myself, I hope you have enjoyed this update. We'll see you with another round next month. In the meantime, remember, spooky is a lifestyle, not a season, so always keep it spooky. Spooky Ventures is the home for spooky content and spooky merchandise on the web. Check it out today at spookyventures.com. And remember, always keep it spooky.